Hey everyone, today's story starts with a quiet employee getting erased, but something doesn't add up. Stick with me, this one turns. Hit subscribe for more real stories like this, and let's get into it. Friday afternoon, I watched my inbox blow up with a deal toast invite that didn't include me. People on the QA floor were laughing about free drinks while I sat at my desk, jaw tight, pretending I didn't care. I wasn't begging for cupcakes, but getting erased on purpose still felt dirty. My name was Thayer R. Delaney. I was 58 years old, and I lived outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'd spent 13 years at CoreLinks Biomedical, doing the work nobody brags about but everybody needs. Most days, people walked right past my cube like I was part of the carpet, and I let them, because quiet men get more done. CoreLinks had stopped acting cute a long time ago. We were a real medtech shop now. Sterile corridors, badge doors, and glass meeting rooms where you could see who was whispering to who. The headline was Macrovia Health Group buying us for $250 million. Every town hall had the same slide deck and the same grin from our CEO, Harlan Voss, like he'd personally cured cancer. Everyone was sure the buyer would keep jobs and throw money around. I'd seen deals like this chew people up. Quick note, before we keep going, share in the comments where you're watching from. And let's continue. What most folks missed was the deal wasn't just signatures. Macrovia's people were buried in our quality history, hunting anything that didn't match reality. If our records lied, their regulators would eat them alive, so they needed a clean bridge from our past to their lawyers' comfort. That bridge was me. I was the named QA and regulatory liaison, listed as an independent witness in the closing package. My key wasn't a laptop or a password IT could swap. It was my personal signing credential tied to that named role. If my credential wasn't valid, the closing packet wouldn't validate. Nobody could cover for me with a late night and a strong coffee. For months, I'd been cleaning up the last set of files, training logs, deviation write-ups, supplier approvals, and the stuff people pretended was boring until a buyer asked for it. Ren Caldwell, a young compliance ops coordinator, kept my calendar from exploding and moved binders between QA, legal, and Macrovia's portal. She was sharp, nervous, and a little too eager to please. Late that afternoon, she hovered in my doorway and said, "Thayer, do you think you can sign the final confirmations today if legal pushes them through?" I kept my voice flat. "Tell them I sign what I've read. They can wait for the truth." On my desk sat a yellow sticky note with one reminder in thick marker, Clause 9C. I'd circled it hard enough to wrinkle the paper. I pressed it onto my monitor like a warning flag and slid my contingency folder into the locked bottom drawer. The drawer clicked shut, and the sound felt louder than it should have in that glass and badge building. I left the sticky note right where I could see it, then went back to my screen like nothing mattered. That was the game at CoreLinks. Act calm while people plan things around you. On Tuesday, February 19th, at 8:47 in the morning, Blair Huxley from HR popped into my doorway with her soft voice and her practiced smile. She held out a fresh NDA addendum like it was a coupon, not a legal document showing up at the worst possible time. "Just an update tied to the transaction," she said, light and friendly, like she was offering gum. I signed it because I wasn't dramatic, and because saying no to HR was how you became a rumor before lunch. Blair took it back and said, "Thank you, I appreciate how quick you are." And she smiled the same way people smile at a vending machine that finally stopped eating their money. At 10:10, the mandatory all-hands invite hit everybody's calendars at once. Free breakfast tacos in the break room, bolded like we were children being trained with snacks. That's how companies did it now. Feed you first, then change your life while you chewed. Merrick Mallory walked out like a man who'd never been told no in his whole career. Mid-40s, perfect teeth, and a suit that fit like it came with its own press release. He didn't talk like a coworker. He talked like a consultant hired to insult your house and charge you for it. "We have legacy rot," he said, pacing slow. "We need speed, and we need accountability, and we are done carrying dead weight." People clapped like he was fixing the weather, like his words were rain after a drought. I didn't clap at all, and I didn't look away either. I watched who leaned forward, who glanced sideways, and who kept their hands still like mine. Harlan Voss sat off to the side, nodding along like this was all someone else's idea. That was his special skill, letting other people carry the sharp objects while he kept his hands clean. After the meeting, Merrick did a lap of the QA floor with Blair trailing him like she'd been assigned as his handler. He didn't stop at the lab benches or ask about actual work. He stopped at the org chart on the wall and started pointing at boxes like a coach drawing plays, tapping certain names longer than others while Blair watched his finger. Ren came back from lunch pale, her eyes wide like she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to. She leaned in and said, "Legal is asking for final binder confirmations again, like the answers from last week didn't count." I felt the hair on my arms rise and I kept my voice low. "You tell them they'll get confirmations when the binder matches reality, not when someone gets impatient." Later that day, near the elevators, I caught Sabrina Holt whispering with Barton Keene. They stopped the second they saw me, like their words had a mute button tied to my face, and I kept walking without giving them the satisfaction of a stare down. That night at home, I pulled out my personal file box and opened the contingency folder I'd built over the years, not to plot revenge, but because I'd seen companies decide a person was the problem when the paperwork got ugly. Clause 9C was right where I remembered it. Terminate the named liaison without a certified substitute, and compliance status paused, full stop. I dragged my thumb under the line, then snapped the folder shut and set it on the table. I left that contingency folder on my kitchen table like a loaded tool, then went to bed with my teeth set and my phone face down. When Thursday morning, February 21st, rolled around, I walked into Core Links like I always did, steady and quiet, because steady men don't give a company free excuses. I barely had my coat on the back of my chair when Blair Huxley appeared at my doorway again, all soft voice and careful eye contact. She didn't ask how my morning was, because she didn't care, and she didn't waste time pretending. "Thayer, can you step into a room for a quick chat?" she said, like we were going to talk about parking decals. The room wasn't a room, it was a glass box with a whiteboard and bad air. There was no manager, no transition plan, no "we'll need you through closing." There was just a manila envelope on the table and two HR helpers sitting like statues, eyes glued to clipboards like looking up might infect them. Blair slid the envelope toward me with both hands and said, "This is an administrative change, and we want it to be smooth for you." I opened it and read the letter, and it was all soft language with sharp teeth. Strategic realignment. Role no longer aligns. Immediate separation. They wrote it like they were describing a broken printer that had finally been replaced. I looked up and kept my voice even, because anger would have been a gift. "Who's taking the named liaison duties for Macrovia?" I asked, slow and clear, the way you talk to someone who might pretend not to understand. Blair blinked twice like the question surprised her, then she smiled again. "That's being handled," she said, and the words came out too fast, like she'd practiced the sentence, but not the truth behind it. One of the HR helpers held out his hand for my badge like I'd already agreed to disappear. Blair said, "We'll also need the laptop returned by end of day," and her tone made it sound like I had a history of stealing office supplies. I handed over the badge because fighting in that room would have turned me into their story. When they walked me back through the QA area, people kept their eyes on their screens like my bad luck was contagious. My face felt hot anyway, not from embarrassment, but from the insult of how clean and casual they were acting. I saw Wren stand up halfway from her chair, her mouth opening like she wanted to say something that mattered, and then she stopped herself. She mouthed, "I'm sorry," and her eyes went glassy like she might cry in front of everybody. At reception, I caught the punchline they'd already prepared. A printed photo of my face was taped behind the desk, recent and sharp, like it had been pulled straight from the security system. Across it, in thick red marker, were the words, "Do not let him back in." My stomach dropped hard, and my pulse started thudding in my ears, because that wasn't routine separation. That was them trying to make me look dangerous so nobody asked why. I didn't yell, and I didn't beg, and I didn't give them anything they could twist. I packed my desk into a cardboard box like a guy in a bad sitcom, except nobody laughed and the cameras weren't there to cut away. I slid my Core Links laptop across the reception counter, watched them log the handoff, then walked out calm on purpose, crossed the lot, got into my car, and opened the secure credential app tied to my named signing authority. I went through the proper steps, selected my personal certificate, and hit the button that revoked it. The app asked me to confirm the revocation, and I did. I started the car and drove home through dirty February slush, keeping my face blank because I refused to give them anything they could call unstable. I got home and didn't even take my jacket off. The quiet felt wrong, like my house was mocking me after years of Teams pings and last-minute, "can you hop on" demands. The kitchen clock ticked while I stood at the table with my keys still in my hand and my throat tight. I pulled the contingency folder out of my bag and opened it flat. Clause 9C sat there in plain language, and I read it slow anyway, not because I forgot it, but because I needed to hear the rule in my own head. Then I called Gordon Sutter, Macrovia's compliance lead, because I wasn't going to let them discover the gap during some shiny signing event. He answered like a guy who still believed schedules meant something, and I didn't waste his time. "Core Links terminated me today," I said, "and I'm no longer your name liaison." Silence stretched while he flipped papers, and when he spoke his voice got careful. "Thayer, you're the named witness," he said. "We can't swap you out in 48 hours. "I understand," I told him, "and formal notice will come through counsel." He exhaled once, said he had to loop in legal, and I ended the call. I called Ephraim Cole next, the attorney who could sound polite while sharpening a knife. I read him the separation letter word for word, and he cut in fast. "They did this right before closing," he said, like he couldn't believe adults were that sloppy. "Yes," I said. and they acted like I was disposable. Then we keep it clean, Ephraim replied. No calls, no favors, everything in writing. He drafted a short notice that I was no longer affiliated with Core Links, and any duties tied to the Macrovia transaction ended the minute they cut me loose. He sent it to Macrovia Legal, Alara Finch, by certified email and courier, because paperwork was the only thing people like that respected. That evening, Wren texted me from a personal number, and the fear in her punctuation did more than the words. They're saying it's just an HR change, she wrote, and Merrick says Macrovia won't care. I didn't answer right away because I wasn't dragging her into the blast zone if I could help it. Around 9:30 that night, Gordon forwarded an automated validation notice from Macrovia's portal, and it hit like a gavel. The subject line read, "Named liaison credential invalid." I stared at it until my eyes burned, then set my phone down and let the system speak for me. The next morning, I opened my personal laptop at the same kitchen table and registered Quiet Seal LLC in 11 minutes. I paid the small fee and watched the confirmation screen turn me into a vendor with terms. Late that night, Wren sent me a photo from reception, my face printed out with "Do not let him back in," screaming in red marker. I took a screenshot, saved it into my secure folder, backed it up twice, and locked the file box in my closet. I woke up Monday to the kind of quiet that felt like it was watching me back. My coffee tasted burnt, even though it was the same brand, and my phone sat on the table like a live wire. When the email hit, it didn't come from Core Links, and that alone told me it was serious. Alara Finch had copied Ephraim, and Ephraim forwarded it to me with one line that carried no sympathy at all. Here we go. The Macrovia message was clean and cold, the way regulated people wrote when they were done smiling. They were formally pausing the acquisition due to non-compliance with Clause 9C, termination of the named liaison without certified substitution, and the word indefinitely sat there like a weight. That word did damage because it didn't promise a way back, and it didn't care who begged. I wasn't in the building, so I learned what happened inside from the scraps that fell through the cracks. Wren's text came first, shaky and too fast, like she was typing while walking. "People look like somebody died," she wrote. "Merrick is saying it is a paperwork glitch, and everyone is pretending to believe him." A minute later, she added, "Harlan is standing behind him like he wants the lightning to hit somebody else." Then she sent a screenshot of a Slack thread she had no business sending, and I didn't like that she risked herself, even for me. It was a string of panicked messages with names I recognized, asking who owned the liaison issue and why legal had not cleared this risk. Somebody wrote, "Can we get Delaney to undo whatever he did?" And somebody else replied, "He cannot, because it is a named credential." I stared at that line until my jaw hurt, because even in a crisis, they still wanted a magic trick. A blocked number called while I was still looking at the screenshot. Barton Keene left a voicemail that tried to sound casual, like we were old buddies and this was a calendar mix-up. "Thayer, it is Barton. Give me a call back when you get a second," he said, and he forced a little laugh that made my skin crawl. 10 minutes later, he left another message and the casual act was gone. "The board is asking questions," he said, voice tight. "I need to clarify the chain here, and I need you to help me understand what happened." By lunch, Wren told me Clause 9C was being whispered like a ghost story in the hallways. She admitted she had asked someone in legal what it meant, and a junior lawyer went digging and found the clause buried in the draft binder, which was exactly how panic spread. "I did not mean to start anything," she texted, and I typed back, "You did not start it, you just pointed at it." A few minutes later, she sent me 15 seconds of audio by accident, meant for a friend, and I heard Sabrina Holt's voice snap like a rubber band. "Who approved termination without a substitution plan," Sabrina said, sharp and loud, and then the clip cut off mid-shuffle. That single line told me there were adults in that building who knew they'd stepped in it. That afternoon, a former coworker sent me a link to a LinkedIn post, and my stomach turned when I saw my own printed face with that red marker warning. Somebody inside the building had snapped the photo and pushed it online like it was policy. The caption framed it like a public safety notice, and the likes weren't random. Macrovia compliance people were clicking the button like they were planting a flag. That told me Macrovia was done being gentle. That night, Gordon Sutter emailed Ephraim asking whether I would be available for independent engagement to restore compliance continuity, and it read like a polite request to buy the bridge back. Under all that noise, Wren dropped one more line that landed harder than anything else. "I overheard Merrick tell Barton, we needed Delaney out before this got complicated," she wrote, and my hands went cold on the phone. I opened a new email to Ephraim and typed one instruction, slow and clean, because I wasn't giving anyone extra rope. "No calls and no side conversations," I wrote. "Everything in writing from here on out," and I hit send. I woke up Tuesday, February 26, with my email already open like I was waiting for a punch. It didn't take long. Blair Huxley emailed Ephraim with the first offer, dressed up in polite words and fake concern. reinstatement, a title bump, and a retention bonus. The number looked big until you remembered they'd put $250 million at risk with one signature and still had the nerve to treat me like office furniture. Ephraim didn't even ask how I felt about it because he already knew. He wrote back for me, crisp and cold, telling her I was no longer an employee and I would not be returning under any internal title. If Quiet Seal LLC was needed, it could be retained at market rate, with a monthly retainer and clear limits, and all communications had to go through counsel. No open-ended hop-on-anytime nonsense, no surprise meetings, and no pretending this was a favor. Barton Keene called again, and this time it came from his real number, which meant somebody told him the game was changing. I let it roll to voicemail because I wasn't feeding him my voice for free. He started angry, talking fast like a man trying to bully the weather. "You're hurting the company with this," he said, and he tried to make it sound like I was kicking puppies instead of following a compliance process. By the end of the message, his tone cracked, and the fear pushed through. "Please, Thayer," he said, "tell me what it takes so we can fix this." While that voicemail sat there, Wren texted me from her personal number again, and I could tell she'd been holding her breath all day. "Merrick is telling people you tampered with systems," she wrote. "He keeps saying you did something wrong on purpose." My throat went tight, not because I felt guilty, but because I finally understood why they'd plastered my face at reception like I was a threat. They weren't just firing me, they were writing a story where I was unstable, I was a risk, and I was the reason the deal died. That same afternoon, Alara Finch reached out and asked if I'd take a short call from Macrovia's CEO, Romy Marlowe. I agreed because Macrovia had been the only adult in the room so far. Romy's voice came through calm and steady, not warm, but not hostile either, like a man who respected process because process kept people alive in regulated industries. "Thayer," he said, "I want to give you two paths. You can come to Macrovia as a senior compliance integration lead, or you can stay independent and sign a short-term engagement directly with us to rebuild the Clause 9C continuity the right way." I didn't posture, and I didn't beg, because that wasn't my style. "I'm not trying to burn Core Links down," I told him. "I'm just not being their unpaid safety net anymore, and I'm not stepping back into a building that labeled me, do not admit, like I was dangerous." Romy paused like he was weighing the words. Then he said, "Understood," and he left it there. No guilt trip, no lecture, just a clean adult conversation that made Core Links look even smaller. Meanwhile, Wren told me Harlan Voss finally wandered through QA looking for someone who knows Delaney, like I was a missing wrench instead of a person. She said nobody volunteered, and that made me feel a hard kind of relief. I met Ephraim in a small co-working office near my house, signed Quiet Seal's engagement templates, and set my rate high enough to make disrespect expensive. When Ephraim slid the last page across, he said, "If they want the bridge, they pay the toll," and I signed my name in thick ink. That night, I drove to my mom's assisted living place and sat with her under the harsh lights in the common room. She looked at me like she always did, like she could tell something was off even when I smiled. "Are you still at that medical company?" she asked, careful and quiet. "Not exactly," I said, and I squeezed her hand, then stood up and walked out to my car with my keys already in my fist. Outside the assisted living place, the air smelled like old snow and exhaust. I sat in my car for a minute with the engine off, knuckles white on the steering wheel, then I drove home and kept my phone on silent so I wouldn't answer anything by reflex. Thursday afternoon, February 28th, I was at my kitchen sink rinsing a coffee mug when a gray SUV rolled up and parked across from my driveway. It didn't creep, it didn't turn around, it just settled there like it owned the view. I noticed because I was the kind of guy who noticed quiet things, and because nobody with good intentions sat that still. A man got out wearing a blazer with no logo and no smile that reached his eyes. He held a thick envelope against his chest like it was important. Then he walked up my front path slow, like he wanted to be seen on camera. He rang my bell twice, then knocked hard enough to feel disrespectful. I didn't open the door. I stood behind it, watched him through my door camera, and recorded the whole thing with my phone in my palm. He leaned closer at one point and looked straight into the lens. He smiled like we had a private understanding, like he was reminding me he could reach me whenever he wanted. Then he slid the envelope into the storm door, turned, and walked back to the SUV. Before he drove off, he pointed at my house like he was making a note for later. That was the moment my calm went cold. I called Ephraim and sent him the video before I even tore the envelope open. He didn't raise his voice or ask if I was scared, because he wasn't in the business of feelings. "Good," he said. "Now we have a second file, and we treat it like evidence." He drafted a notice on the spot that all contact had to go through counsel, and any uninvited visits would be treated as harassment, period. The envelope itself was the usual corporate slime. It had apology language that never said sorry, vague offers that never named numbers, and a mutual non-disparagement clause that read like a muzzle. They still didn't get it. My problem wasn't pride. My problem was safety and control, and they had already shown they'd use fear when money didn't work. That evening, I drove over to the Core Links building, not to go in, just to sit across the street and look at the front doors. I wanted to know if my face was still taped up like a threat. Ren texted back fast. "It is gone now, and they are acting like it never happened." I stared at the glass lobby from my car, then drove away. When I got home, my son called about tuition for the spring term. "Dad, the bill is due soon," he said, trying to sound casual. "We'll be fine," I told him, and I kept my voice steady until he hung up. After that, I sat at my kitchen table and did math the way men do when they don't want to admit they're worried. Then I wrote the numbers down anyway. Later, Gordon Sutter emailed Ephraim again, polite words with a sharp edge. Mokrovia would not accept any interim authorization tricks. I forwarded it to my secure folder, printed a copy, and slid it into the file box with everything else. I locked the file box after I slid Gordon's email inside, and I kept it close for the next few days like it was a spare tire you prayed you wouldn't need. I still went through my normal morning motions, but everything felt rigged, like the company had turned my life into a board game, and they were rolling dice behind a curtain. On March 4th, Ren asked me to meet her in a crowded coffee shop off the Parkway. She didn't say much in the text, just, "I can't write this down, and I can't do this at work." When I walked in, she was already there with her shoulders tight and her eyes scanning the room like she expected someone to pop out from behind the pastry case. Her hands shook when she set her phone on the table, and she kept it face down until she was sure nobody was leaning close enough to read it. "I'm not trying to be dramatic," she said, voice low, "but they're doing something, and your name is all over it." I leaned forward and kept my face neutral, because she needed steady more than she needed sympathy. "Show me what you brought," I said, and she flipped the phone around. It was a screenshot chain from an internal email thread. The subject line was bland, something like diligence cleanup, but the body wasn't cleanup at all. It was an old quality gap, an audit response that had been softened so it wouldn't spook Mokrovia, and the language was careful in the way liars got when they knew regulators read for a living. Merrick Mallory's name was on it, and Sabrina Holt's name was on it, and then my stomach turned when I hit the line that mattered. Delaney will not sign off if he sees the original deviation narrative. I felt heat crawl up my neck, not because I was surprised I had enemies, but because they'd said the quiet part out loud like I was an obstacle, not a human being. So that was it. It wasn't modernization, and it wasn't strategic realignment. I was a witness they couldn't control, sitting on a named credential, and the buyer was about to ask hard questions they didn't want answered. I kept reading, jaw tight, and I could almost hear Merrick's polished voice calling at speed while he shoved reality under a rug. Ren swiped to the next image, and it was a calendar screenshot that made the planning even uglier. A meeting I was never invited to, titled 9C Contingency, Remove Dependency. The date on it was a week before they fired me, which meant nobody forgot anything, and nobody made an innocent mistake. They had mapped it, talked it through, and decided I needed to be gone before the deal got complicated. I didn't treat Ren's evidence like a weapon right there in the coffee shop, because sloppy revenge was how you lost in court. I told her, "You stop sending anything from company systems, and you keep your head down because they will look for a scapegoat." She swallowed hard and nodded. "I don't want to be a hero," she said. "I just don't want to be next." "Then listen to me," I said, and I slid a napkin over her phone like it could shield her from cameras. As soon as I got back to my car, I called Ephraim and told him to lock it down the right way, time-stamped and preserved so nobody could wave it off as gossip. Ephraim moved fast and quiet, sending a letter to Core Links' board counsel that referenced retaliatory termination risk and potential misrepresentation during diligence. He didn't accuse anyone outright because implication made smart people sweat and it kept our hands clean. That same day, Cyrus Pruitt, the lead investor, requested a call with Ephraim. I wasn't on it, but Ephraim gave me a summary afterward, along with a short memo Cyrus's office sent, and the message was blunt. A paused deal was bad, but a deliberate cover-up was worse, and the board needed to protect itself fast if Merrick had pushed out a named liaison to hide a compliance gap. That night, Romy Marlowe emailed me through Alara, short and respectful. He wrote that Mokrovia appreciated clear lines and clean records, and he added, "If you choose to stay independent, we'll respect it." I saved the email, backed it up into my secure folder, and added it to the file box before I turned the lock. I kept Romy's email in my secure folder and went back to living like a man with his head on a swivel. The days after that felt tight, like the air in my house had less room in it, and every notification sounded like it might be someone trying to rewrite the story again. On Thursday, March 7th, Mokrovia made it official. Their public statement was short and clean, blaming unresolved compliance continuity requirements, and it didn't bother with names or drama. That was the part that hit hardest, because it meant they were done negotiating in public and done protecting Core Links' feelings. They walked, and Core got left holding the bag they'd set on fire. I learned what happened inside Core from a leaked investor call audio clip somebody emailed to Ren. She knew I told her to stop touching anything connected to their systems, but fear makes people stupid, and loyalty makes them worse. She didn't forward the clip to me, thank goodness, but she sent 2 shaky paragraphs that told me enough. Barton sounded like he aged 10 years in one morning, she wrote. He kept saying they were addressing it, but his voice kept slipping. I could hear it in my head, even without the audio. That thin panic executives got when a spreadsheet turned into consequences. Ren said Cyrus Pruitt asked one question on that call, and it wasn't a friendly one. Who decided the name liaison was expendable? She typed, quoting him as close as she could. Nobody answered it straight, and that silence said more than any confession. Merrick's paperwork glitch story didn't survive once the buyer walked away, and Sabrina's confused act sounded pathetic even secondhand. Harlan apparently tried to stay optimistic, like optimism could patch Clause 9C after the fact, and I almost laughed at that because it was so useless. A few days later, Core counsel reached out through Ephraim with a new tone. It wasn't offers anymore, and it wasn't threats either, because both had failed. It was terms, careful and cautious, and they wanted to license the compliance bridge work I'd built so they could stabilize operations and stop their other customers from getting nervous. They still didn't want to admit what they'd done, but they suddenly respected what I controlled. I didn't gloat, and I didn't insult them, because gloating was cheap, and I was done being cheap. I sent a quiet seal statement of work with limited scope, strict communications, and a rate 4 times what my old salary worked out to hourly, plus a retainer up front. They tried to negotiate like we were haggling over a used car, and Ephraim shut it down with one sentence. Market rates reflect market risk, he wrote, which was the polite version of, you created this risk, so you pay for it. Around then, a friend still inside the building sent me a note that made my jaw tighten in a different way. Merrick had been asked to step away pending review, and the wording sounded like they were trying to hide a shove behind a handshake. It wasn't justice yet, but it was movement, and movement mattered in places that loved to stay still. Ren resigned not long after that. She told me on the phone, voice small but firm. I can't stomach the smiling meetings anymore, and I don't want to be next. I kept it simple. You did your job and you kept your conscience, I told her. That is enough. I wrote her a reference letter that didn't mention the war, just her work ethic and her brain, and I sent it before anyone could poison the well. Macrovia didn't come back to buy Core but Gordon Sutter hired Quiet Seal anyway for a short engagement on a different acquisition. That was the funny part, the part that proved the point. The buyer still valued the bridge, just not the company that tried to smash it. At home, my son admitted he'd picked up extra shifts, so I didn't have to worry, and I told him, do not do that for me, because I will handle my own house. The next morning, I opened my banking app, entered the tuition amount, and hit send on the wire transfer. The confirmation screen told me the tuition wire was complete, and I felt my shoulders drop for the first time in weeks. I shut the banking app, wiped my hands on my jeans like I'd touched something dirty, and opened my Quiet Seal inbox. The subject line waiting for me said Statement of Work Accepted, and it came from Core. The retainer landed the next day, and the bridge became a contract. By early April, they were officially my client, not because they liked me, but because reality didn't care about pride. They needed continuity, and I owned the cleanest path back to it. I never stepped back into that building, not even to prove a point. Every meeting stayed remote, and every deliverable lived in a tracked folder with timestamps and receipts. Core tried to slide inside requests right away, the old can you just have it dressed up as teamwork. I shut it down. On the kickoff call, I told their new point of contact, you send requests in writing, you wait your turn, and you do not call my personal phone. Their lawyer said, understood, Mr. Delaney. The do not let him back in photo didn't vanish. It floated through HR and compliance circles and investor chats like a warning label. I saved every screenshot that hit my phone because patterns mattered. Cyrus Pruitt pushed for a formal internal review, and I only knew because Ephraim got a board memo demanding preservation of records tied to my termination and the diligence cleanup thread. Ephraim called me and said, that is legal talk for somebody getting sacrificed, and you keep your files tight. I told him, my files are tighter than their stories. Merrick Mallory was out by mid-month. Core announced it as a leadership change to support strategic focus, like he'd simply wandered off to find himself. Nobody said my name, but everybody knew the math. Harlan Voss stayed, but smaller, and Ren told me before she left that he'd stopped doing victory laps and started asking basic questions. A few days later, a small package showed up at my home office with no branding and no pitch. Inside was a brass desk piece shaped like a bridge span and a plain note from Romy Marlowe that said, respect the builders. I ran my thumb over the cold metal and felt something settle in me that Core never earned. Quiet Seal went from an emergency raft to a real business. I had 3 steady clients, 2 short engagements, and 1 long retainer that paid better than any family culture speech ever did. I wasn't anybody's scapegoat anymore, and nobody could tape my face to a desk and call it policy. The loud lesson was simple. You could cut a man out of an org chart, but you couldn't cut him out of a contract he was named in, and if you tried, you didn't get revenge, you got physics. I set Romy's brass bridge on the corner of my desk, clicked Join Meeting, and started billing for the work. All right, last gut check. Can I ask you something? If you've got the hype feature, tap it to support this video and help it reach more people. And please subscribe and hit like too, because it's huge for us, and it's just 1 click. Then tell me in the comments, if your job tried to scapegoat you to cover their mess, would you walk away clean or charge them to build the bridge back?